COVID-19 has affected our lives in ways we never imagined would happen in our lifetime. Not only did it change our routines, the grief over losses from jobs and relationships, the fear of getting sick, and the absence of outlets and connections to cope with these stress triggers are taking a toll on our mental health. So while we're fighting a battle outside to protect our bodies, we're also fighting a separate battle in our minds. It's one that will determine whether we have what it takes to rise above the challenge. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez. Welcome to MedTalk Health Talk. Joining us today on the program are Dr. Ronald Elipanio, a psychiatrist from the Medical City, and Ms. Jean Goulbourne, a mental health wellness advocate and founder of the Natasha Goulbourne Foundation. Thank you both for sharing your time and joining us on the program.
Thank you for having us.
Now, the COVID-19 pandemic has turned our world upside down. But beneath the grim news, the economic and physical concerns about the pandemic, there's an issue that's not getting enough attention, and that's mental health. Now, Ms. Jean, what are your thoughts about this?
Well, there's many things one singular person can do, a community can do, churches can do, and the LGU. So, Dr. Freddy, in my campaign, in my advocacy, I put a lot of, I try my best to network with barangay captains, with mayors now, because through them, the only way that my foundation can help is by giving programs and teaching volunteers that pass the psychological test. And we have programs for peer counseling. We have programs on the toolkit, mental health first aid toolkit. So those are the programs that immediately we can do. But the best intervention we have, and I'm very happy to inform you and your viewers, is Hopeline. And Dr. Ron Elipanio and 5 other doctors have given their time for 20 minutes of talk on high-risk callers of Hopeline. They're giving it for free.
Ms. Jean, do you think mental health is as important as physical health, even in this time of the pandemic?
Actually, both are very connected. And that is the lifestyle and mental well-being talks that we do. Since I engage doctors, I also engage those who believe in natural recovery. So we give the audience and the viewers and our kababayan na mga Pilipino, we give them an option and we teach them how to rate their depression. And believe it or not, from the videos that I've done for NGF Mindstrong YouTube, we got 20% higher calls this past 5 days. And I've been getting calls on my private phone of housewives within the age of 75 to 85 asking me for help. Yung senior po, they're very affected. The seniors who live alone and they have empty nests.
Now let's talk about common mental health disorders associated with COVID-19. We hear people say they get anxiety attacks from all the uncertainties brought about by the pandemic. Some say they even get depressed. Of course, these words are used loosely these days, but what exactly are anxiety and depression about? Dr. Ronald, how can you distinguish one from the other?
Okay, when we talk about anxiety, it refers to the presence of fear or apprehension that is out of proportion of the situation. Versus if we talk about depression, depression is primarily related to one feeling sad, lonely, and all the other feelings that are associated with being sad. Now, these can be normal, and from the spectrum of normal, it can also reach to a point that it becomes pathologic or a form of illness. I think the next question here is how do you differentiate whether it's normal anxiety versus anxiety that requires mental health professional? Also the same with depression. the best way for us to say is that if it affects one's functioning in all aspects of life, meaning your own professional life, your social life, and even your own care for oneself, your anxiety and depression, if that gets affected in all aspects, most likely you would need professional help.
Okay, we're taking a short break, but when we return, we'll discuss anxiety, our body's natural response to stress, and when it becomes a cause for concern. You're watching MedTalk Health Talk right here on CNN Philippines. This is MedTalk Health Talk. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez. Our topic for today is mental health. This COVID-19 crisis is triggering increased anxiety to most of us, especially with heightened everyday attention on TV and on social media. The pandemic makes for an uncertain future, which makes it a stressful time for everyone. And it's okay and normal if we feel more anxious than usual. But anxiety disorders are different and can cause constant, overwhelming fear. Now, Dr. Ronald, can you explain how normal anxiety is different from an anxiety disorder?
Okay, the experience of anxiety is not too different from those with anxiety disorder. So the typical worry about things that are happening given the pandemic can be normal. I think that becomes the challenge now in this pandemic for us psychiatrists to determine whether or not this level of worry is no longer within the norms of normalcy. But one highlight here is, for instance, you're experiencing anxiety, and the usual symptoms would be constant worry, there's an overwhelming sense of fear, and there's physical symptoms such as palpitations, sweating, trembling, there's that lightheadedness, and all these symptoms. When it affects you, as we all know, life is starting to move forward because despite the pandemic, and we all need to make a living, go back to school, and if that anxiety stops you from moving forward, it paralyzes you, then that could be a good sign that it is a form of disorder.
So going back to that, is that the only way that a person will be able to know that he or she is suffering from anxiety disorder? That you mentioned how it pretty much paralyzes you. Is that correct? Is that something that our viewers should watch out for? The only thing that our viewers
Yes.
should watch out for?
Yes, that is one of the best signs for you to know when to seek professional help. But I always say, and as a psychiatrist, we always highlight the importance of mental health as well as physical health. As what you were saying earlier with Miss Jean, that how important is mental versus physical health, they're just as important. So we always say the earlier you seek consult, regardless of whether or not you feel this is a normal range, anxiety or not, the better for us to address it. Because as they say, and for us psychiatrists, there's no health without mental health.
Now, what about anxiety and a panic attack? Is there a difference between the two, Doc Ronald?
Okay. So, anxiety is an umbrella term for a group of disorders. And under that, you have panic disorder, you have generalized anxiety disorder, there are specific phobias. There's, under that, also, you have certain social anxiety, which is part of it. So, when we talk about anxiety disorders, for us psychiatrists, the question is what kind of anxiety disorder it is, and it will dictate the direction of the treatment.
Very good. Now let's move on to depression naman. A lot of us are guilty of using the word depression as a catch-all for being unhappy or sad or frustrated. But these days, we're working a little harder to find the right words for negative emotions that don't actually equate it with a serious mental illness as depression. Now, this question is for Ms. Jean. We all have bad days and we feel sad about so many things, but we eventually pull out of it. Depression is a little bit different, am I right?
Yes, it's different. Depression, we in Hopeline, we level it into mild depression, medium depression, and high risk depression. So for us, as a mother, may I just, from experience, inform you that I had a problem understanding sadness and depression then, before my daughter passed away. There was a question with me about sadness and anxiety and depression. I suffered grief. I suffered sadness, terrific grief from losing her in a tragedy, but grief and sadness from loss, a loss of a romantic love affair, a loss of a job, a loss of financial, that can fall under sadness, grief of loss. Pag umabot na hindi na makatulong, it's all focused just on the loss. Then it can move to anxiety. From anxiety, it can move into depression.
Now, as the saying goes, time heals all wounds. Dr. Ronald, can we say the same for depression? Does depression go away on its own in time, or does it require intervention?
Okay, that's a good question. The studies will tell you that if it is clinical depression, what Jean has mentioned earlier, she herself had to experience a certain level of depression from the loss of her daughter. One thing you have to understand that depression can be categorized into three levels: mild, moderate, and severe. Going back to the question, only if you are experiencing some form of adjustment to a certain situation, like now, grieving, for instance, we've lost so many in this fight and this battle against the COVID-19. One may experience some form of depression, not necessarily to the extent that is moderate to severe. So one can actually recover from that. But again, as I would say, it's important for you to be very proactive once you experience these symptoms. There are services available to you during this pandemic that doesn't necessarily have to be costly. National Center for Mental Health and even the NGF has support systems available to people who need professional help.
Now, depression isn't generally considered preventable, and causes are hard to pinpoint, making prevention very difficult. But is it possible? More after the break. Depression can be severe and life-altering, affecting the quality of life of the person living with it. And in some cases, depression is preventable, even if you've already had a previous episode. Now, Ms. Jean, is there a way a person can prevent or even avoid depression?
I found out that really exercising is very, very, very good. And social media is one of the cause of depression. The likes, and you don't get any likes. And then the games, the video games. We also have to get into closer relationship within the family.
Now, not everyone deals with depression the same way, but there are some things we can do and avoid to help those dealing with it. Now, what are some of the do's and don'ts when dealing with someone who is experiencing depression? This question is for Ms. Jean, and to hopefully also address the stigma associated with those with depression.
Yes, the most important thing is learning how to listen. Listen, listen, listen with no judgment. Judgment is the worst. You cannot say to someone, kailangan ganito ang sabihin mo, gawin mo, mga ganon. Hindi pwede. Makinig lang. Listen, listen. And the second one is understanding. I have a formula which I want to share with your viewers. It's called 448. It's called box breathing. When you're in an anxiety and you really feel you're going down, the first thing you do is breathe in 4, hold the breath for 4 seconds, and then slowly release for 8 seconds. So it's called 448. It's very easy to remember. And if you really have bad anxiety and you can't remember how to count, in the olden times, we used to breathe on a brown paper bag. And so those are the important things to know. And then in helping others, we have to give them a sense of purpose, give them a purpose in life. Let them write the happy moments. Let them write gratitude, what they're thankful for.
So those are the do's. How about some tips for our viewers on the don'ts naman?
I want to suggest to society and media, when you report a death, like a suicide or somebody who attempted because of depression, don't deal on the detail. Just report it blandly without judgment. Because the minute you judge and the friends begin to judge on Facebook, don't do it. Don't judge. Before judging, you guess. You guess what happened. Don't guess. It's not fair to the family. So it's very important not to judge, not to gossip. Don't gossip. Don't tell the person, ano ka ba? Ano ka ba? Mental ka ba? That is the problem. We make a joke when a person comes to us and says, I'm feeling down. Those are Filipino terminologies we have to remove.
Depression can increase the risk of suicide or self-injury. But when is it time to intervene, Dr. Ronald?
Whether be it anxiety or depression, as someone who cares for someone who may be struggling with this and you see them unable to be functional in their lives, for instance, for those who are clinically depressed, there's a tendency for them to isolate. They no longer are able to take care of themselves. So these are, red flags for you to convince them or even hold their hands to the doctor's clinic in order for them to get appropriate treatment. Now, one thing that we also want to highlight is that depression can also manifest with anxiety. So these are two related conditions. So for us, it's not a question of whether you have anxiety or depression before you seek consult. The moment you have an emotional issue and it affects your life or it somewhat controls your life, this is a good sign for you to seek professional help.
Now, stress, anxiety, and other negative emotions in this pandemic can be overwhelming, but you're not alone. We're all feeling the effects of this new, uncertain normal, and very few of us seem to have more to be cheerful about these days. But the good news is that you're not powerless. You have more control over your moods and emotions than you may realize. Mental health issues are treatable. There's no easy fix. It will require extra effort, but it is you who needs to take the first step. Just remember, we can and will get through this together. We'd like to thank our guest, Dr. Ronald Elipanio, psychiatrist from the Medical City, and Ms. Jean Goulbourne, mental wellness advocate. Thank you both and all for joining us on MedTalk Health Talk today.
Thank you very much.
I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez. Keep a safe distance and stay safe.